All right, well, hello everyone. Welcome to my talk today about air permitting for a unique biochar reactor in California and what we ran into in terms of air permitting with the local air district. I'm Paden Voget with Catalyst Environmental Solutions, and I've been working in the environmental consulting industry for more than 20 years, helping private industry and government agencies with permitting and compliance. And we were hired by CEDOS Group to help with their air permitting and compliance for their biochar projects, including the one I'll tell you about today. And we actually have Mayo Ryan and Jessica Bronner. Well, maybe Jessica's not here right now, but they're from CEDOS, so I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions as well. Okay, so the project. Here's a snapshot of the Biochar Reactor. This slow pyrolysis reactor served as a pilot project for the CEDOS Group to test the technology as part of a larger rollout plan to produce biochar and carbon credits at future industrial scale plants throughout California. It was sited adjacent to a compost facility that collected municipal organic waste in Monterey, California, and under the jurisdiction of the Monterey Bay Air Pollution Control District, or MBARD is what we call it. And here's a quick map. At the time, we thought that co-locating the project at the local landfill would be an advantage, but with respect to air permitting. But as I'll get into in a minute, that wasn't necessarily the case. This unit was particularly challenging to permit because you can see the biochar reactor has a single chamber where the feedstock is in the same chamber as the combusting syngas. The unit is initially heated up using a diesel burner, and then once the unit is brought up to temperature, the burner's turned off, and then the feedstock is heated as it moves through the chamber. And as the volatile components are released during the pyrolysis process, they are mixed with air and spontaneously combust to provide the heat for the self-sustaining thermal reaction, which is controlled with a series of water jets and air intakes. Here's a figure showing the separate reaction zones. As you can see, the gas reaction zone hovers just above the feedstock, and the position of this reaction zone or bubble can be controlled with the operation of the air intakes. And with a slight upward vacuum effect and airflow direction, the feedstock passes through the reactor in an oxygen-limited environment to produce a really high-quality biochar. In the beginning, the feedstock was sourced from the compost facility located next door. It consisted of woody biomass that was chipped up by the compost facility operators. Initially, this material was collected from the general public, which, as I'll discuss next, was one of the reasons for some of our regulatory strife. All right, here's where we get into some of the good stuff. CEDOS initially proposed the use of the municipal green waste as the feedstock with a maximum feed rate of 8 tons per day, but without an established exception from the incinerator rules for pyrolysis units. This meant that the unit theoretically fell under the other solid waste incinerator rule per 40 CFR 64E, for units that process less than 35 tons per day of solid waste. However, at that time, the EPA had issued their advance notice of proposed rulemaking on pyrolysis and gasification units. The proposed rule change would have removed pyrolysis from the incinerator rules, and we thought, how lucky. This project is perfectly in line with the proposed rule change, so of course it should be exempt from the incinerator rules. But because the rule change hadn't been adopted yet, MBARD required that we apply for an applicability determination from the EPA to officially get their blessing for exemption from the other solid waste incinerator rules. I'll go back. But we had no idea how long of a process working with the EPA would be. We initially submitted our request for an applicability determination in March of 2023. After which the EPA then shifted their position and withdrew the proposed rule change in May of 2023, mostly as a result of public opposition to pyrolysis and gasification of materials other than organic biomass, like plastics and tires. The EPA finally provided a ruling for our project in January of 2024, which was 10 months later. They ruled that our project was a very small municipal combustion unit and subject to the other solid waste incinerator rules, which is not what we wanted. For a small operator like CEDOS, the other solid waste incinerator performance standards were very prohibitive. To comply, we had to provide extensive additional documentation, including a waste management plan, a siting analysis, an operating training program, and extensive monitoring, record keeping, and reporting. Also, the emission stack and the site infrastructure were not originally constructed to support source testing and had to be significantly modified after the fact. The source testing itself for such a small operation was very onerous and expensive. But all was not lost, I think due in large part to all of the work that the USBI and USBC is doing at the policy level. In September of 2024, the EPA provided guidance on how to make non-waste determinations for clean cellulosic biomass, which is defined by the EPA as plant-derived materials such as greenwood, forest thinnings, crop residues, and clean construction and demolition wood, for instance. Also as defined by the EPA, clean cellulosic biomass can qualify as a traditional fuel and would not be considered a secondary material or solid waste when burned as a fuel, as long as it's not considered discarded. The guidance further clarified that units burning traditional fuel are not regulated as solid waste incinerators under the Clean Air Act. They also stated that if clean cellulosic biomass is processed to make biochar, then it is not considered discarded as a solid waste, and the resulting biochar would be considered a traditional product under 40 CFR 241.3. So all we needed to do now was to prove that all the feedstock fell under the definition of a non-waste fuel. Easy, right? I don't know if you guys can read, that's pretty small, but the flow chart over there on your guys' right shows the decision-making path for both clean cellulosic biomass per 40 CFR 241.2 and non-waste fuel determinations per 40 CFR 241.3. And I'll just say that through this whole process, the MBARD was really great about working with us to find a way out of the incinerator rules, but they were very careful to be sure that we produce a legally defensible path with supporting documentation. To that end, here's how we did that. First, we proved that the feedstock was clean cellulosic biomass, which was easy because woody biomass was specifically included in the definition provided by the EPA. And according to the flow chart, that alone should have popped the project out of the incinerator rules. But MBARD wanted to be sure to dot all their I's and cross all their T's. And so we took it one step further to also prove that the feedstock met the additional requirements of a non-waste fuel. In order to do this, CEDOS contracted directly with 2 local private land clearing companies to provide their woody biomass directly to CEDOS. By doing this, CEDOS was able to prove that the material was managed within the control of the generator. And that was possibly the most difficult step because it required some contracting logistics. Next, through a self-determination, we proved that the feedstock material met all 3 of the legitimacy criteria of 40 CFR 241.3D, including that the feedstock material is managed as a valuable commodity. It was, because it was otherwise have been chipped and made into sellable compost. The feedstock material has a meaningful heat value, which it did because it had a heat value of more than 5,000 BTU per pound. And the feedstock material has contaminants comparable to the traditional fuel the unit is designed to burn, which it also did since the unit was designed to process woody biomass and the feedstock we sourced was clean. So ta-da! We were able to further prove that the feedstock was non-waste fuel and thus not subject to the incinerator rules. And MBARD subsequently revised our permit outside of the other solid waste incinerator rules. So what did we learn? We learned that working with the EPA takes a very long time and that the current state of affairs at the EPA, things are taking even longer, meaning that getting an applicability determination for a pyrolysis unit outside of the incinerator rules is very time prohibitive. And what I mostly think about is that using this strategy of making a self-determination that the feedstock is a traditional fuel could probably be construed as a contradiction to the argument that pyrolysis is not incineration because you're burning fuel. So this is probably more of a short-term solution as opposed to the long-term policy shaping going on right now for the biochar industry. And most importantly, we learned to avoid referring to the feedstock as waste. No matter where it came from, there's usually a way to define material as not discarded. All right, what would I say are best practices? Oops, go back. What we found most helpful is starting the process with our local air districts with a collaborative attitude. In California in particular, with the organic waste diversion requirements of Senate Bill 1384, the air districts are really desperate to find solutions to divert organic materials from landfills and are eager to find regulatory pathways that are manageable for smaller operators. For our particular strategy to work, it's important to prove that the feedstock is within the control of the operator. So although CEDOS didn't produce the feedstock themselves, we found a pathway to meet the air district's requirements through private contracts and individual local providers. And then for future projects, we're finding that it's super helpful to educate our local air districts on the EPA's September 24 2024 guidance and to proactively provide a self-determination that the feedstock meets the definition of clean cellulosic biomass and non-waste fuel. Each air district in California and throughout the United States operates differently. So our setting a precedent in Monterey has been really advantageous with respect to our ongoing work with other air districts for permitting of these types of units outside of the incinerator rules. So to conclude, I'll just say that this method is working right now. We're currently helping CEDOS permit their next project in the San Joaquin Valley Air District, who have already indicated that they'll permit their unit outside of the solid waste incinerator rules. So it's just that easy, right? And that is it. I mean, I know that I went through everything very quickly. It's, it's a very simple pathway. It's more about communicating with your air district and helping them navigate that. Any questions? Yeah.
So, two questions. Did they end up getting a sort of permit then that wasn't, related to the solid waste rules? And then my other question was, in addition to the contracts, did they still use the compost facility wood in the
Yeah, good
process?
questions. Yeah, so yes, MBART ended up revising the permit for the unit to be outside of the incinerator rules. So all of the record recording and source testing requirements were much less than what was required under the incinerator rules. And to answer your question about the compost facility, the material was delivered to the compost facility, and so there was actually two levels of contracts. One was the contract with the material provider themselves to say that they would provide the material straight to CEDOS. And then at the compost facility, we got an agreement from the compost facility operators to say that they would manage that material separately, to chip it, to collect it and chip it and provide it to CEDOS. So we were able to prove that CEDOS had control of the material from start to finish. You're welcome.
Hey, thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Yeah, can you hear me?
There you are.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for the presentation.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, did you have to deal with the best available control technologies for emissions within this permitting process? And was it a hassle?
It was a hassle. We had to, under the other solid waste incinerator rules, and so we had to go through a full analysis of the backed requirements. But this unit was a pilot project, and so we didn't end up having to implement any of the air control methods. But if the unit had gone into full production, they probably would have made us. And that, in this instance, the particulate matter was higher than the regulatory threshold, but in subsequent units, CEDOS has designed the units to control particulate matter. But yes, so it did have to go through that. And some air districts work differently. Some of them require it automatically, and some only require it over a certain threshold.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So did you have to go through, even though with a pilot unit, a full compliance test then?
A full compliance test under the other solid waste incinerator rules, which was very expensive and very cumbersome, requiring like metals testing and dioxins, which wouldn't normally be required for something more of like a traditionally fuel burning piece of equipment.
We saw that with another biolizer. We'll give you a permit, but you have to do $100,000.
And it's cost prohibitive, right? Yeah, it's no joke. And then I will say that for moving forward, for most air districts are going to require some sort of source testing. And so if people are developing these units, think of that ahead of, and design the units and the exhaust stacks to be able to accommodate source testing. Anything else? All right.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all very much.